So we're back looking at Ptolus. Hopefully this time we'll actually make it into learning about the city itself. Last time we sort of kind of learned about the surrounding area, more like the state of the world. Yeah, I think I'm just going to skip these. Yeah, in Ptolus today, children learn only Imperial Common. If they know other languages, they most likely learn from their parents. One exception is that wealthy and aristocratic children are sometimes taught Elvish or Polystani. Species of Ptolus are in many ways the same, found in most fantasy worlds. However, a few unique aspects to each species discussed in this chapter tailor them for the setting. In addition, a few new species and a few monsters also make acceptable PC species in Ptolus. This chapter contains very appropriate information about the various species available. There are no spoilers in this chapter, but page references to other chapters may have spoilers. Should decide which species you want to allow. For convenience, this chapter divides into major species, minor species, and NPC species. The latter are species that are probably not appropriate for player characters without a lot of consideration. Is all the information about these species found in the core rules, unless the information here contradicts it. These major species start with dwarves. Dwarven history says there were once 3 overclans: the Grail Warden, Stone Might, now called the Stone Moss, and the Earth Singers. Few know of this third tribe, for no one has heard from them in millennia. Their greatest queen was kidnapped by the Dread One, Asalagos Malkith, and never returned, which ended her noble line. The Earth Singers never recovered and eventually died out. Wars almost never belong to any chaotic alignment, although there are exceptions. In ages long past, the Grail Warden dwarves settled in the Preston Peninsula, in the Hotash Mountains. When the press spread northward, their dwarven allies came with them and helped establish the Empire of Tarsus. The Grail Warden dwarves take their name from the White Grail, a fabulously powerful artifact they uncovered as they carved their main fortress city into the side of a mountain. They renamed the fortress Grail Keep and proclaimed that watching over the Grail was their destiny. They have done so ever since. Grail Warden dwarf artisans are known for their skill with gears, lenses, gunpowder, and other devices. Unlike other dwarves, they also are known for their use of magic. But it is a studious, methodical approach to magic. They treat spells as they would any science. Dwarves in general are fabulous artists, and throughout the Empire they prize crafted items more than others. Grey-Warden dwarves are usually friendly, serious, dedicated, and hardworking, but not as gruff or unsociable as other dwarves. They get along with humans, but the various types of elves are only tolerable to them. They dislike orcs, but not as much as the other dwarves do. They have no general opinions about most other species. Stone Lost are the displaced builders of Dwarven Hearth, their ancient realm below the city of Ptolus. Driven out of their ancestral home by Ghoul, hundreds of years ago they refused to go back. Now they live in and around the city of Ptolus. No non-dwarf knows, or at least understands, why they will not go back to reclaim their ancient city. To the Stone Lost, however, it represents a life they feel they no longer deserve. By deserting their home, they lost the rights to it, but they refuse to permit anyone else to go into Dwarven Hearth either. That would be a defilement of a perfect memory. The Stone Lost have great skill with stone and metal. In the city, they frequently work as artisans, architects, engineers, or merchants, dealing in stone or metal. Most dwarves in Ptolus are Stone Lost by a fair margin, although some do not actually call Ptolus home. These live in the largest gathering of Stone Lost dwarves, Khalid Dell, a subterranean community beneath Ptolus near one of the entrances to Dwarven Hearth. Elves. In ancient days, halflings and gnomes were considered types of elves. Even though modern people look at these species as distinct, there are still many elven types. Shoal elves, the winged cherubim, subterranean dark elves, and the twisted harrow elves. And of course, the elder elves, now gone, comprise two more subspecies called the Solar and the Lunas. Elves today revere the moon, although not as much as did the ancient Lunas elves, after whom one moon is named. They love good food and wine, and like elaborately prepared and served. They prefer silver to gold. Elves in general know a good deal about the stars, the moons, and the world. For example, they know the planet is round and has a circumference of slightly less than 20,000 miles. The elves work with many special minerals, materials, and herbs. In particular, they are known for two metals, Ithilden, decorative silver that glows at night but is dull and almost invisible during the day, and Ithilnoir, a thin, strong material with the same properties. Elves, except harrow elves, are only rarely of lawful alignment. Solar and Lunas elves, collectively known as the Outer Elves, they were once the greatest and most powerful of elvenkind. However, they are all extinct, or so most people believe. The truth is, members of both species survive today as the Earthen Adar. The Solar were golden-haired and fair and stood very tall. The Lunas were usually white-haired, although some had golden hair as well. They stood shorter than a Solar. So, I kind of find this interesting. If you've been watching the Lord of the Rings series with Jackson Crawford, something is bringing up, that is kind of just wondering is, what is an elf? What is a troll? And to him, an elf is basically, from the original sources, just any sort of good or neutral kind of entity that isn't one of the gods. And So that's kind of interesting to me that you do have all of these sort of things that um, they're grouped as, that they were once considered or just grouped as an elf. And just as much home on sea as on land, they are by far the most common type of elf. In fact, most people simply call them elves rather than showells. They're called Sea of Leaves. They find open terrain oppressive. Elven cities are fabulous places of slowly twirling towers and curving walls in ages past. Most Shoal now live in small communities or cosmopolitan cities. Shoal elves often seem aloof and arrogant. In particular, they respect some of the rarer species, such as elf, without specifying the subspecies that character is a shoal elf. So I guess if you're using a setting and they actually really value it. To have been a species of elvenkind, rarest of the major species, gnomes love magic and music above all else. Some stories name halflings as an original species of elvenkind. They frequently live among humans, although many halflings work for themselves as Salus fame, which roughly translates to quicklings. Elves and half-orcs. Although rare, these species are more common in Ptolus than in many places in the world. Half-elves are always. Half-orcs usually come from the Orni Nom tribes of Palestine and Roth. Of all intelligent peoples, no changes are required for standard humans in the Ptolus campaign, but details on are available in the Gazetteer of the World. It looks like we already. Yeah. As a potential PC species, should consider whether or not these species would make appropriate player characters for their part in the Empire. Centaurs, or as they call themselves, Aram, live in great numbers in Palestine and thus their enemies in the past. Aram are boisterous, arrogant, and boorish, yet many find them likable nonetheless, but others are content or even happy to sit for long periods of time in the same place. Aram cannot stand or require stationary work, like sewing garments or making tools. In the city, they simply rely on others to do so. While those who live on the plains prefer to wear minimal clothing and travel with as little gear as possible, city dwellers have adopted garments and equipment of their neighbors, recognize that humans, dwarves, elves, and the rest clearly dominate the lands, so they have made their peace with other species, and many live willingly. Between centaurs and orcs, and less frequently battles between centaurs and lizard folk. These are all events in the distant past. Aram do not take offense at comments or comparisons to horses. In fact, they take such remarks as compliments. Few choose to remain. The Aram adventurous is well known in Ptolus. He was one of the founding members of the Delvers Guild and surprisingly skilled at underground and cavern exploration. Most centaurs in Ptolus choose to dwell in the Nared neighborhood of Midtown. Herds have dwindled. Aram and Ptolus find work in physical roles, hauling loads in warehouses or other businesses. Some work as imposing bodyguards or hired muscle. Still others serve as messengers or pull small carts for hire for long periods. Religion. Ptolusites tend to honor a variety of deities, while tribal section and travel or Torkskal, the Aram god of just vengeance. To read or write a book, so they have their own set of simple symbols for conveying general ideas. Other than that, Aram rarely know how to read the languages they speak. Most centaurs living in Ptolus learn to read enough common to get by. Tribal centaurs may refer to themselves by their name and tribe. Adventurers, they Aram respect those who bravely face danger and accomplish great deeds. In fact, their culture values heroes greatly. Cherubim elves, as ancient as the shoal, among others not of their kind. Cherubim are winged elves with lightweight frames to help them soar in the sky. They come to Ptolus only rarely, and when they do, they spend their time in danger rather than confront it. Aware of their fragility, they know that the best way for them to survive is to stay wary and alert. Their greatest fear is that something might happen to their wings. Introspective, which often clashes with their inherent fear. Apprehension usually wins out. Cherubim are thin and frail, which their hair color and their wingspan is usually 3 times their height. Their eyes are pale gray or silver. Cherubim feel skittish around non-elves. Human and other species often mistake them for angels or Asimar. However, so most people seem favorably disposed towards them, perhaps even more aloof and retiring. Cherubim elves from Cherubar, a land named for them in the distant west. They prefer mountainous regions, particularly places where communities are very small. Cherubim worship most of the same gods as other elves, but also Ahar and the air-oriented deities. They do not use surnames. Cherubim elves rarely adventure, simply because they're a bit timid and physically quite weak. Their ability to fly is such an asset, however, that most cherubim who do attempt such a dangerous profession find that they are well suited. Rumors abound that care for the cherubim. Hero elves. When Ghoul the half-god captured many Shoal and Elder elves from the Moonsilver Forest and herded them into the dungeons beneath Goth Golgamel, his dark fortress halfway up the spire, there he and his demonic servants were dark powers that corrupted their souls utterly. When he finished his awful work, Ghoul released the elves, dumped hero elves back into the world to show his contempt for all that was good and pure, and to demonstrate his ability to unmake anything made. The hero elves, for the most part, did not join in the Great Ghoul War. Normal elves, many hero elf generations have passed in the 1,000 years since their creation. Since then, their dramatic powers and physical deformities have softened with each new birth, but still the taint of evil remains. Hero elves are mistrusted and disliked. Occasionally one is born who displays the power of evil of the original. Even after all this time, hero elves are as twisted on the inside with bitterness and hate as their flesh is twisted and deformed on the outside. They know everyone hates and fears them, and truth be told, they hate and fear themselves, at least to a degree. They resent the happy lives of others, and evil hero elves often seek to make others as miserable as they are. They frequently attempt to disfigure their enemies the way they have been disfigured. Some still seek revenge on those who mutated their forebears. Hero elves have the same general build as other elves. Their bodies typically bear horrible birthmarks, scars, and various deformities. Their flesh is a pale yellowish white, and their eyes are red. Heralds have a lifespan similar in length to that of humans. Heralds are disdained by virtually all others, but especially by other elves. You see them as abominations only slightly better than dark elves. Higher elves share a general wariness for all other species, but beyond that, they have no preference. Her elves lean toward evil, but some have overcome this predilection. Unlike other elves, they are not typically limited to non-lawful alignments. Her elves have no lands of their own. Most live in ken in isolated communities. Typically, hero elves find mates only among their own kind, but sometimes they take mates through violence from among shoal elves or even humans. Offspring from such rapes are always hero elves. Heralds are generally too bitter to find much solace in religion. They do have very few clerics, but the few who do pay homage to a deity often worship one of the demon gods or perhaps Cram, goddess of faults. For many have a death wish, they are fierce combatants, often quite ruthless. Usually, however, they do what they do more to prove themselves than to gain riches or fame. And have a reputation often deserved of being a little intolerant of others. They believe in the general superiority of their own kind, perhaps not in every field, but in all areas that truly matter. Spellcasting, winemaking, woodcraft, so forth. Halflings have a reputation for being very accepting of others, including their cultural traditions and beliefs. It's not uncommon for halflings living in a human city like Ptolus to take on the mannerisms and outlook of humans. They're, as well as the most accepting, they might be put off by some of the behaviors, but they can learn to get along with any of them. Of course, there is a level of inherent deception in any discussion that lumps all numbers going to like every centaur. It's possible for Littorian and Halfling to be the best of friends, but be rare and seem strange in the eyes of others. Culturally, things get even more complicated. The cultures within the Empire today are shaped by the imperial conquest of more than 700 years ago. It's important to realize that the Empire took control with little bloodshed. It's obvious that even today, most people of pure Prustan descent look upon other cultures like the Palestani and the Rothans with some disdain. The Palestani are a fiercely independent people who proclaim their individualism by decorating their bodies with paint and piercing. Many think that Rothan folk are simple farmers, perhaps even backwards or unsophisticated. The Northmen from Null and the folk from beyond the Grey Mountains are both dismissed as uncouth barbarians, despite the fact that those two cultures have little in common any longer. In Ptolus, however, social class means more than species or culture. The nobles of various houses, who despite their Palestani origins have fully adopted imperial modes of dress and manner, as well as distinguished from nobility, are the very wealthy, and beneath them are government officials and clerics of Lothian. Next come the middle-class merchants and craftspeople, a level of the strata currently growing faster than any other. Near the bottom come the low-class laborers and tradesmen, who themselves are above the beggars, criminals, and other so-called riffraff. Of course, many have found, and most of them do not care. Adventurers would normally fit into the lower classes, except for those who strike it rich or gain heroic reputations, and are sometimes accepted into the upper classes. Hunters, usually found roaming open grasslands, far from civilization. Littorians only rarely separate from their tribes, Unlike members of the common species, only the unique individual Littorian interacts with other species. Littorians love the outdoors, good food, and long, well-considered stories, not boastful or exaggerated ones. They have deep sense of personal honor, personal in that it's not about saving face, but about being true to oneself. And even if it means making a choice that others might not consider the best one. All Littorians develop their own sets of morals and ethics, although some principles remain true across most members of the Littorians are taller and more muscular than humans. Their bodies are covered in light brown fur, eyes with narrow pupils, manes of brown hair surround the heads of males. Most people notice a thick, almost musky scent around Littorians, but few think it unpleasant, except Aram, who they respect but do not entirely understand. In Ptolus, they get along best with halflings, tribes of orcs, Impaliscan, and Roth fairly well. Littorians organize their tribes by strength and respect, not by law. They find the concept of sense of honor and respect for others. Far more Littorians are good or neutral than evil. They're very rarely selfish or cruel in their culture. They subtly control the open grasslands upon which they wander. Their power and cunning make some clear map. Littorians have no concept of worship and see little need for ritual. They do not understand or crave, but not reverence. Complex Littorian language proves difficult for humans and men to attempt to master it. Littorian has an alphabet of its own, but by the standards of other species, members of another profession, that allows them to use both their outdoor instincts and their natural strength and agility, frequently shunned by members of others themselves. So, down to the sort of following species are typically reserved only for NPCs in Ptolus, but you might consider allowing one to be used. Aasimar. These holy-blooded plain-touched are rare, but more common on Ptolus than this reaction by furthering their kind's reputation for benevolence and heroism. Virtually all Aasimar are good or else. Zophos Adhar is a well-known Aasimar paladin and Knight of the Pale. Dark Elves, an age round, who embrace wickedness and rage against the sun and moons. The Dark Elves, as they soon became known, became the bane of all corruption. Although it's possible for them to overcome the negative influence of their society, they almost never do. Dark Elves hate the sun. These elves are sinister and crafty, value deception and guile, and scoff at honesty. They love poison and see betrayal as a fact. That their surface-dwelling brethren have would favor provocation over practicality in any case. Dark elves who dwell in large communities, they hate the dwarves almost as much as they hate surface elves. In the Warrens, the dark elf Madame Katha runs a... If you do have a player who's dead set on being a dark elf, they are going to face prejudice, executed. I don't know what they put in it, but I know we got that's not Minotaurs. More than simple monsters places as Ptolus. Even in the city, though, they are barely tolerated. Many people look upon them with disdain and distrust, not eat their meat raw. Most civilized Minotaurs are neutral or evil, almost all are chaotic. Shibata is a powerful Minotaur cleric originally birthed by an evil demon god. Although some ancient texts claim they were actually created by an evil wizard, proud beings, and have a strong sense of honor but tend to be aggressive. They are sometimes deadly enemies of humans, and other citizens of Ptolus are much more tolerant. A prominent Ormunon, or chieftain named Radek, lives just outside the city with his consort, who appeared primarily because of the Fallen. Many live and work among the demonic fallen and the undead loving forsaken works of evil gods. Many tieflings retain their ancestors' evil outlook, a great many are also chaotic. Ross, the leader of the Forsaken, that does leave us with not much time left, so it looks and that, yeah, that should be tomorrow.